Hello and welcome to this revision podcast on AQA AS level history on Britain 1906 to 1918. This is Unit 1, the Conservative Collapse. Okay, so what was Britain like in 1900 at the beginning of this course? Britain is very industrial, the economy is growing, they have really big factories starting to go up in their cities. There's overcrowding caused by that. There's poverty, urban growth. There aren't very many trade unions, so there's a lot of workers in bad conditions in the cities. In terms of the military, Britain is in the middle of the Boer War, and it's part of the Scramble for Africa, which is basically all the big empires trying to get hold of Africa. In terms of politics, the Conservatives and the Liberals are the largest parties. Labour was created in 1900, but it's very small at the moment. Politics in general is very sort of laissez-faire, no one's interfering, they just sort of want to let stuff be, let it alone. And only 6 out of 10 men, that is, can vote, so it's just rich, landowning men, no one else, pretty much. So in terms of the political parties, you've got the Conservatives, led by Lord Salisbury, and they have made up the government since 1895. They still have the majority in 1900, they're sort of the main established party. They want to conquer South Africa and generally make Britain's military stronger again, have a good, strong empire. Their supporters are generally people in rural areas, people who are rich, people who own land, people who own businesses, kind of the same as right now. Then you've got the Liberals. They've been in power for 3 out of 20 of the last years, so they're not quite as sort of fixed as the Conservatives. They are led by Gladstone, who then dies, and then they're led by Campbell Bannerman. They are the second largest party. Their policies in 1900 are work for the unemployed, supporting old age pensioners, or making a pension. They want to improve education and support the undeserving poor. So this was this Victorian attitude or sort of idea that some poor people deserved to be where they were because they were lazy, and some poor people, it was not their fault, like because they were sick and they couldn't work or something like that. And the Liberal supporters were generally the middle classes or nonconformists, and the nonconformists are people who are other denominations of Christian other than Church of England, so sort of Baptists and Methodists and Quakers and those sort of people. So Labour has just been formed in 1900. They are led by Keir Hardie, who is a Scottish miner and unionist who self-educated and sort of worked his way down to London and form this party. They're steadily growing, but again, like the Liberals have way more support than them, they've only just been made. Their policies are, again, work for the unemployed, national railways, which I think is still on their manifesto, but we can see how badly that ended up working out. And again, a state pension and helping children and poor people. And their supporters are generally trade unionists and socialists. The last big party, or the last party to be honest, is the Irish Nationalists, and they are led by John Redmond. They basically just want Irish independence. That's pretty much the only thing on their list at the moment, and so they're pretty much supported by Catholic Irish people who want independence. That's pretty much it. So up until 1906, the Conservatives have been in power, and they've had, pretty safe majority, pretty substantial majority. But in 1906, everything changes. It is a Liberal landslide, this election, and basically for this exam, you need to know why. So let's go through the factors. So one of the factors is the Boer War. The Boer War should have been won really quickly, really. It was just Britain and this massive empire they've got over a couple of people in South Africa, and it took 3 years for the British soldiers to defeat the Boers, so that was a bit embarrassing, and it made the Conservatives sort of look like a weak government because they hadn't won the war quickly. So it pitted people like against the Conservatives, and made them look like a bad government. And then the Liberals sort of exploited this. Campbell Bannerman sort of exploited it by helping the rumours along that there were these bad techniques being used by the British, like saying that the British were using concentration camps and stuff like that. And then people who were sort of shocked, like morally, by this, decided to vote for the Liberals instead. There was also the 1902 Education Act. Basically, it sort of started off as a good idea. The Conservatives wanted to introduce the state funding all education, so, that sounds like a good thing, right? The government paying for schools. But this included church schools, and the nonconformists, who aren't Church of England, don't want to pay for, like, Anglican C of E schools. Like, they don't want their taxes paying to educate these kids in stuff they don't agree with. So they were really annoyed about that, and there was sort of like this outrage. And Lloyd George, the Liberal MP in Wales, obviously Wales is made up of more than one constituency, but he was a Liberal MP in Wales, encouraged Welsh people and a lot of nonconformists not to pay their taxes to fund the schools. So that was like a big sort of scandal with him getting people not to pay their taxes, and it caused like this huge uproar, and the Libs were sort of seen as like providing an alternative to the Conservatives by really getting people riled up about this. And so the Liberals then gained loads of votes from nonconformists, and especially in Wales. Another factor is the Taff Vale railway case. Basically, some railway workers went on strike with the help of a trade union for railway workers, and the rail company decided to sue the trade union for like the loss of earnings when the workers were on strike. In the sort of court case, the court said that it was okay for the railway to sue the trade union, and the trade union had to pay up. And the Conservatives didn't overrule this decision, even though they could have done, which effectively made strikes illegal. So now they're saying, if they're saying that if you go on strike, you can be sued for the loss of earnings, they're basically making strikes illegal. And this made them seem like the sort of enemy of the workers. And in doing that, they gave the Liberals a sort of group to target, because no one was really targeting the workers, and so the Liberals sort of found a little niche that they could get some votes from. Okay, then in 1902 to 1904, there was the Chinese slavery type scandal, which was basically some Chinese labourers brought in to South Africa to work in the gold mines there for really, really cheap, like basically slavery. They were being paid so little and the conditions were so bad. And in Britain, the trade unionists and workers were worried that if the Chinese could just sort of go to South Africa and work really cheap there, they would come over to Britain and work really cheap in Britain, and that would mean that the British workers would lose their jobs. So it's a lot like people are worried about immigration now. They just thought that the Chinese would obviously work for less, and then they would be out of a job. And then a lot of nonconformists and other people worried about morals, like think it's really wrong, and the fact that the Conservatives have sort of allowed this makes them really unpopular. And so it makes those people, again, the workers and the nonconformists, turning away from the Conservatives and turning towards the Liberals. In 1903, the Liberals made a pact with Labour, known as the Lib-Lab Pact. You might have another one of those, maybe. They basically agreed not to oppose each other in sort of set constituencies. I think there were 35 of them. Yeah, 35 constituencies. And it sort of prevented splitting the anti-Conservative vote. So if you're in a constituency where it's Conservative or either Labour or the Liberals, there's only one party that's not the Conservatives, so you're going to vote for that one, and then it prevents the Conservatives getting a majority just because the anti-Conservative vote is divided. Then in 1903 there was the big sort of uproar of tariff reform. Basically, as an island, Britain is never going to really be self-sufficient, and it wasn't then. It had to pay import taxes on the foreign goods from other countries that it was bringing in. So these other countries were making loads of money off Britain paying these taxes. And it was sort of not good in terms of Britain competing like the British Empire being competitive with these other countries. So some Conservatives think that taxes should be increased on foreign goods so that it's so that they can compete with these other countries. And then some of them don't, and some of them support imperial preference, which is basically an idea by Chamberlain that we should only increase taxes on goods from outside the British Empire, so making the empire stronger and other ones weaker in Britain. So the Conservatives are really split over this idea, and it really makes a lot of people angry. But the Liberals are all really united because they all believe in free trade, which is no import taxes on anything. Like, you can buy and sell whatever you want. That's a big Liberal thing. So they were sort of previously fighting about other stuff like new ideas and about Ireland, and they sort of come together over this free trade thing because they all believe in free trade. But the Conservatives are really divided, so they look like sort of weaker party. And the Conservatives also lose the vote of the working class because the working class are really worried about prices rising. Like, if you put import taxes on stuff like bread, it gets really expensive, and people who don't have a lot of money are going to be really worried about rising prices of essential things like bread, so they turn away from the Conservatives. Then in 1904, Balfour, who's a big important Conservative guy at the moment, tries to bring in the Licensing Act, which is introduced to try and regulate alcohol consumption and keep children safe, which again sounds like a good thing, and people were behind it initially. But then what Balfour said they were going to do is compensate the brewers, the people who make the alcohol, for their loss of earnings, which basically just makes them seen as sort of viewed as only helping big businesses, only helping the wealthy, and not, they're not really in it to help the kids or to help the working class. And again, this just makes people turn towards the Liberals. And then there was Balfour himself, who's takes over the Tory leadership. I think he's Sir Salisbury's nephew, I think. But he sort of inherits leadership of the Conservatives, and he doesn't really know what he's doing. He doesn't realise he's alienating the workers. He doesn't realise he's unpopular. He misreads all these situations. He was the one who brought in the Education Act and the Licensing Act. They were all his bad ideas. And then he thought that the Conservatives were doing really well, so he was the one who called the election early in 1906. So again, that was his fault. And then finally, there's just the fact that Conservatives didn't introduce any social reforms during their term or ever. So both Labour and the Liberals are offering, new ideas about pensions and education and helping kids, and there's sort of growing interest in that at the moment, and the Conservatives just aren't fulfilling that want from the people at all, so they're just going to lose popularity. So in 1906, the Liberals win, and they decide they're going to start on a big sort of introduction of social reforms, which will be in Unit 2 in the next one, if there is a next one. And one of the factors for why they did this was the growing new idea of new liberalism. So basically, classic or old liberalism was all about sort of freedom of the individual, laissez-faire, leaving people alone, self-help, very Victorian ideas. They wanted the government's role to be really limited, only providing essentials, which would mean low taxes. And they're very much about, individual freedom, no censorship, do whatever you want, free trade, all of that. But then new liberalism comes in, and it's about freedom still, but they include freedom from poverty and sickness. So they're now thinking, it's all very well being free, but you can't do anything if you're poor, so maybe we should help these poor people. So they think now that the state should provide these safety nets for people, meaning, pensions, stuff like national insurance. So it is going to mean higher taxes. So it's quite a new idea. Reasons why new liberalism was growing. You've got the Rowntree and Booth study. That's Rowntree as in the fruit pastels guy. It was a survey in 1903 about poverty in the UK. and they found that 30% of the urban population could be classed as poor, and they got similar results in like rural areas. So this sort of made people wake up and realise that there are a lot of poor people in an empire that's really very rich, and it's not even poor people in like India or wherever else. So, you know, they can't really put it down to discrimination. It's people in their own country, in their own wealthy country, who are really poor. There were also intellectuals publishing around the time of the election about this sort of new idea of state intervention, such as Hobson and Hobhouse. Then there were sort of more political reasons, like Labour. So Labour's made in 1900. They've been sort of gaining support, and it really worries the Liberals because now they've got two political parties competing for a sort of similar niche, and they don't like having this competition. So they're sort of trying to not go too far away from Labour policies so they can keep those people happy as well. There's also the worry over national efficiency. So the Boer War had highlighted that there was a big need for like health initiatives because loads of people who signed up were unfit to fight. I think it says in the textbook that it's 40% of men who tried to sign up to be in the Boer War were pronounced like malnourished or just generally, you know, unfit to fight because of health problems. So, you know, they want to preserve the state of the empire, they want to preserve its strength, so they need the nation to be efficient. They need national efficiency, healthy people, and for that they're going to have government health initiatives. Other factors, if they have nice moral principles, they'll keep the support of their nonconformists. Lloyd George recently in 1906, went over to Germany, where they had more of a welfare state, like lots of social reforms. And Germany is one of Britain's big economic competitors, so he goes over there and he sees that social reform is working over there. And he thinks, well, maybe it can work over here, you know, maybe we'd have a nice strong economy and be as good as Germany if we sort of follow their lead. Also, the Conservatives have obviously lost popularity because they failed to change anything, they failed to reform, so the Liberals think, well, if we're going to stay popular, we've got to do some social reforming. And they also hope that new liberalism will help to sort of unite the party again, because they'd sort of been divided before 1906, they were fighting over like things like Irish Home Rule, because some of them, like Gladstone, like Home Rule, some of them don't. More on Home Rule in the other units. But they hope that new liberalism, this idea, will sort of unite the party again and give them a nice central belief that they can, you know, use to keep them like a really strong party.